Gormenghast. Chapter 11. If ever there was a primogenital figurehead or cipher, that archetype had been resurrected in the shape of Dead Yawn. He was pure symbol. By comparison, even Mr. Fluke was a busy man. It was thought that he had genius, if only because he had been able to delegate his duties in so intricate a way that there was never any need for him to do anything at all. His signature, which was necessary from time to time at the end of long notices which no one read, was always faked, and even the ingenious system of delegation whereupon his greatness rested was itself worked out by another. Entering the room immediately behind the head, a tiny freckled man was seen to be propelling Dead Yawn forward in a high rickety chair with wheels attached to its legs. This piece of furniture, which had rather the proportions of an infant's high chair and was similarly fitted with a tray above which Dead Yawn's head could partially be seen, gave fair warning to the scholars and staff of its approach, being in sore need of lubrication. Its wheels screamed. Dead Yawn and the freckled man formed a compelling contrast. There was no reason why they should both be human beings. There seemed to be no common denominator. It was true that they had 2 legs each, 2 eyes each, 1 mouth apiece, and so on, but this did not seem to argue any similarity of kind, or if it did, only in the way that giraffes and stoats are classified for convenience sake under the commodious head of fauna. Wrapped up like an untidy parcel in a gun-grey gown emblazoned with the signs of the zodiac in 2 shades of green, none of which signs could be seen very clearly for reasons of the folds and creases, save for Cancer the crab on his left shoulder, was Dead Yawn himself, and all but asleep. His feet were tucked beneath him. In his lap was a hot water bottle. His face wore the resigned expression of one who knew that the only difference between one day and the next lies in the pages of a calendar. His hands rested limply on the tray in front of him at the height of his chin. As he entered the room, he opened one eye and gazed absently into the smoke. He did not hurry his vision, and was quite content when, after several minutes, he made out the 3 indistinct shapes below him. Those 3 shapes, Opus Fluke, Perch Prism, and Belgrove, were standing in a line, Opus Fluke having fought himself free of his cradle as though struggling against suction. The 3 gazed up at Dead Yawn in his chair. His face was as soft and round as a dumpling. There seemed to be no structure in it, no indication of a skull beneath the skin. This unpleasant effect might have argued an equally unpleasant temperament. Luckily, this was not so, but it exemplified a parallel bonelessness of outlook. There was no fibre to be found in him, and yet no weakness as such, only a negation of character. For his flaccidity was not a positive thing, unless jellyfish are consciously indolent. This extreme air of abstraction, of empty and bland removedness, was almost terrifying. It was that kind of unconcern that humbled the ardent, the passionate of nature, and made them wonder why they were expending so much energy of body and spirit when every day but led them to the worms. Dead Yawn, by temperament, or lack of it, achieved unwittingly what wise men crave: equipoise. In his case, an equipoise between 2 poles, which did not exist. But, nevertheless, there he was, balanced on an imaginary fulcrum. The freckled man had rolled the high chair to the centre of the room. His skin stretched so tightly over his small, bony, and rather insect-like face that the freckles were twice the size they would normally have been. He was minute, and he peered perkily from behind the legs of the high chair. His carrot-coloured hair shone with hair oil. It was brushed flat across the top of his little bony insect head. On all sides, the walls of horsehide rode into the smoke and smelt perceptibly. A few drawing pins glimmered against the murky brown leather. Dead Yawn dropped one of his arms over the side of the high chair and wriggled a languid forefinger. The Fly, as the freckled midget was called, pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket, but instead of passing it up to the headmaster, he climbed with extraordinary agility up a dozen rungs of the chair and cried into Dead Yawn's ear, "Not yet! Not yet! Only 3 of them here!" "What's that?" said Dead Yawn in a voice of emptiness. "Only 3 of them here!" "Which ones?" said Dead Yawn after a long silence. "Belgrove, Perch Prism, and Fluke," said the Fly in his penetrating fly-like voice. He winked at the 3 gentlemen through the smoke. "Won't they do?" murmured Dead Yawn, his eyes shut. "They're on my staff. Aren't they?" "Very much so," said the Fly. "Very much so. But your edict, sir, is addressed to the whole staff." "Oh, I forgot what it's all about. Remind me." "It's all written down," said the Fly. "I have it here, sir. All you have to do is read it, sir." And again the small red-headed man honoured the 3 masters with a particularly intimate wink. There was something lewd in the way the wax-coloured petal of his eyelid dropped suggestively over his bright eye and lifted itself again without a flutter. "You can give it to Belgrove. He will read it when the time comes," said Dead Yawn, lifting his hanging head onto the tray before him and languidly stroking the hot water bottle. "Find out what's keeping them." The Fly pattered down the rungs of the chair and emerged from its shadow. He crossed the room with quick, impudent steps, his head and rump well back. But before he reached the door it had opened, and 2 professors entered. One of them, Flannel Cat, with his arms full of exercise books and his mouth full of seed cake, and his companion, Shred, with nothing in his arms, but with his head full of theories about everyone's subconscious except his own. He had a friend, by name Shrivel, due to arrive at any moment, who, in contrast to Shred, was stiff with theories about his own subconscious and no one else's. Flannel Cat took his work seriously and was always worried. He had a poor time from the boys and a poor time from his colleagues. A high proportion of the work he did was never noticed, but do it he must. He had a sense of duty that was rapidly turning him into a sick man. The pitiful expression of reproach which never left his face testified to his zeal. He was always too late to find a vacant chair in the common room, and always too early to find his class assembled. He was continually finding the arms of his gown tied into knots when he was in a hurry, and that pieces of soap were substituted for his cheese at the master's table. He had no idea who did these things, nor any idea how they could be circumvented. Today, as he entered the common room, with his arms full of books and the seed cake in his mouth, he was in as much of a fluster as usual. His state of mind was not improved by finding the headmaster looming above him like Jove among the clouds. In his confusion, the seed cake got into his windpipe, the concertina of school books in his arms began to slip, and with a loud crash cascaded to the floor. In the silence that followed there was a moan of pain, but it was only Belgrove with his hands at his jaw. His noble head was rolling from side to side. Shred ambled forward from the door, and, after bowing slightly in Dead Yawn's direction, he buttonholed Belgrove. "In pain, my dear Belgrove? In pain?" he inquired, but in a hard, irritating, inquisitive voice, with as much sympathy in it as might be found in a vampire's breast. Belgrove bridled up his lordly head, but did not deign to reply. "Let us take it you are in pain," continued Shred. "Let us work on that hypothesis as a basis. That Belgrove, a man of somewhere between 60 and 80, is in pain, or rather that he thinks he is. One must be exact." As a man of science, I insist on exactitude. Well then, what next? Why, to take into account that Belgrove, supposedly in pain, also thinks that pain has something to do with his teeth. This is absurd, of course, but must, I say, be taken into account. For what reason? Because they are symbolic. Everything is symbolic. There is no such thing as a thing per se. It is only a symbol of something else that is itself, and so on. To my way of thinking, his teeth, though apparently rotten, are merely the symbols of a diseased mind. Belgrove snarled. And why is the mind diseased? He took hold of Belgrove's gown just below that gentleman's left shoulder, and with his face raised, scrutinized the big head above him. Your mouth is twitching, he said. Interesting. Very interesting. You probably do not know it, but there was bad blood in your mother. Very bad blood. Alternatively, you dream of stoats. But no matter, no matter. To return. Where were we? Yes. Your teeth. The symbols, we have said, haven't we? Of a diseased mind. Now, what kind of disease? That is the point. What kind of disease of the mind would affect your teeth like this? Open your mouth, sir. But Belgrove, a fresh twinge undermining his scant reserves of patience and decorum, lifted his huge boot the size of a tray and brought it down with a blind relish upon Mr. Shred's feet. It covered them both, and must have been excruciatingly painful, for Mr. Shred's brow coloured and contracted. But he made no sound, save to remark, Interesting, very interesting. Probably your mother. Opus Fluke's body laughter did everything except break him in half or find vent in a sound. By now, several other professors had infiltrated through the smoke from the direction of the door. There was Shrivel, Shred's friend, or follower, for he held all Shred's opinions in the reverse direction. But, for sheer discipleship, Mr. Shrivel was a rebel compared to the three gentlemen who, moving in a solid huddle, their three mortarboards forming between them a practically unbroken surface, had seated themselves in a far corner like conspirators. They owed allegiance, those three, to no member of the staff or to any such abstraction as staff itself, but to an ancient savant, a bearded figure of no specific occupation, but whose view of death, eternity, pain, and its non-existence, truth, or indeed anything of the philosophic nature, was like fire in their ears. In holding the views of their master on such enormous themes, they had developed a fear of their colleagues, and a prickliness of disposition which, as Perch Prism had cruelly pointed out to them more than once, was inconsistent with their theory of non-existence. "Why are you so prickly?" he used to say, "when there ain't no pain or prickles?" At which the three, Spiregrain, Splint, and Throd, would all at once become a single black tent as they shot into conference with the speed of suction. How they longed at times for their bearded leader to be with them. He knew all the answers to impertinent questions. They were unhappy men, these three, not with native melancholy, but in views of their theories. And there they sat, the smoke wreaths coiling around them, their eyes moving suspiciously from one face to another of their heretic brethren, in jealous fear of a challenge to their faith. Who else had entered? Only Cut Flower, the dandy, Crust, the sponger, and the choleric Mulefire. Meanwhile, the fly had been standing in the corridor with his knuckles between his teeth, and had been emitting the shrillest of whistles. Whether they caused the sudden appearance of the few stragglers at the end of the corridor, or whether these characters were in any case on their way to the common room, there was no doubt that the fly's shrill music added speed to their steps. Smoke hung above them as they approached the door, for they had no desire to enter Fluke's fug, as they called it, with virgin lungs. "The yarner's here," said the fly, as the professors came abreast, their gowns fluttering. A dozen eyebrows were raised. It was seldom that they saw the headmaster. When the door was closed upon the last of them, the leather room was, indeed, no place for anyone with asthma. No flowers could flourish there, unless, indeed, some gaunt and horny thing, some cactus long injured to dust and thirst. No singing birds could thrive, no, not the raven even, for smoke would fill their thin, sweet windpipes. It knew nothing, this atmosphere of fragrant pastures, of dawn among the dew-bright hazelwoods, or rivulets, or starlight. It was a leather cave of sepia fog. The fly, his sharp insect face hardly visible through the smoke, swarmed up the high chair, hand over hand, and found dead Yawn asleep and his water bottle stone cold. He prodded the headmaster in the ribs with his little bony thumb, just where Taurus and Scorpio were overlapping. Dead Yawn's head had sunk even lower during his sleep and was barely above the tray. His feet were still tucked under him. He was like some creature that had lost its shell, for his face was disgustingly naked. Naked not only physically, but naked in its vacancy. At the fly's prod he did not wake with a start, as is the normal thing. That would have been tantamount to a kind of interest in life. He merely opened one eye. Moving it from the fly's face, he let it wander over the miscellany of gownsmen below him. He closed his eye again.
"What are all these people for?"
His voice floated out of his soft head like a paper streamer.
"And why am I?"
he added.
"It's all very necessary,"
answered the fly.
"Shall I remind you, sir, yet again of Barquentine's notice?" "Yes, why not?"
said Dead Yawn.
But not too loudly." "Or shall Belgrove read it out, sir?" "Why not?"
said the headmaster.
"But get my bottle filled first."
The fly climbed down the chair rungs with the cold bottle and threaded his perky way through the group of masters to the door. Before he reached it, he had, aided by the poor visibility in the room, but mainly by the exceptional agility of his small fingers, relieved Flannel Cat of an old gold watch and chain, of shred of several coins, and cut flower of an embroidered handkerchief. When he returned with the hot water bottle, Dead Yawn was asleep again, but the fly handed Belgrove a roll of paper before he climbed up the wheeled chair to waken the headmaster.
"Read it,"
said the fly.
"It's from Barquentine."
"Why me?" said Belgrove, his hand at his jaw.
"Damn Barquentine with his notices! Damn him, I say!"
He untied the roll of paper and took a few heavy paces to the window, where he held it up to what light there was. The professors were by then sitting on the floor, in groups or singly, like Flannel Cat, among the cold ashes under the mantelpiece. But for a lack of wigwam, squaws, feathers, and tomahawks, there might have been a tribe encamped beneath the hanging smoke.
"Come along, Belgrove! Come along, man!"
said Perch Prism.
"Get those teeth of yours into it!"
"For a classical scholar," said the irritating Shred,
"For a classical scholar, I have always felt that Belgrove might be handicapped, grievously handicapped, first by the difficulty he finds in understanding sentences of more than 7 words, and secondly, by a stultifying effect on his mind of a frustrated power complex."
A snarl was heard through the smoke. "Is that what it is? Is that what it is? La!" This was Cutflower's voice. It came from the near end of the long table on which he sat, dangling his thin, elegant legs. There was so high a polish upon his narrow, pointed shoes that the highlights of the toe-caps were visible through the smoke, like torches through a fog. No other sign of feet had been seen in the room for half an hour. "Belgrove," he continued, taking up where Perch Prism had left off. "Stab away, man, stab away. Give us the gist of it, La. Give us the gist of it. Can't he read it, La, the old fraud?"
"Is that you, Cutflower?" said another voice. "I've been looking for you all morning. Bless my heart, what a fine polish on your shoes, Cutflower. I wondered what the devil those lights were. But seriously, I'm very embarrassed, Cutflower. Indeed, I am. It's my wife in exile, you know. Ragingly ill. But what can I do? Spendthrift as I am, with my bar of chocolate once a week. You see how it is, my dear chap. It's the end. Or almost. Unless I half wondered, could you? Something until Tuesday. Confidential, you know. How one hates asking. Squalor, and so on. But seriously, Cutflower, what a dazzling pair of hoofs, old man. But seriously, if you could manage... Silence! Shouted the fly, interrupting Crust, who had not realized he had been sitting so close to a colleague until he heard Cutflower's affected accents beside him. Everyone knew that Crust had no wife in exile, ill or otherwise. They also knew that his endless requests were not so much because he was poverty-stricken, but were made in the desire to cut a dashing figure. To have a wife in exile who was dying in unthinkable pain appeared to Crust to give him a kind of romantic status. It was not sympathy he wanted, but envy. Without an exiled and guttering mate, what was he? Just Crust. That was all. Crust to his colleagues and Crust to himself. Something of 5 letters that walked on 2 legs. But Cutflower, taking advantage of the smoke, had slipped from the table. He took a few dainty steps to his left and tripped over Mulefire's outstretched leg. "Miss it and thrash your purple!" roared an ugly voice from the floor. "Curse your stinking feet, whoever you bloody are! Poor old Mulefire! Poor old hog!" It was yet another voice, a more familiar one, and then there was the sense of something rocking uncontrollably, but there was no accompanying sound. Flannel Cat was biting at his underlip. He was overdue for his class. They were all overdue, but none save Flannel Cat was perturbed on that score. Flannel knew that by now the classroom ceiling would be blue with ink, that the small bow-legged boy, smattering, would be rolling beneath his desk in a convulsion of excited ribaldry, that catapults would be twanging freely from every wooden ambush, and stink bombs making of his room a nauseous hell. He knew all this, and he could do nothing. The rest of the staff knew all this also, but had no desire to do anything. A voice out of the pool cried, "Silence, gentlemen, for Mr. Belgrove!" And another, "Oh, hell, my teeth, my teeth!" And another, "If only he didn't dream of stoats!" And another, "Where's my gold watch gone to?" And then the fly again. "Silence, gentlemen! Silence for Belgrove! Are you ready, sir?" The fly peered into Dead Yawn's vacant face. In reply, Dead Yawn answered, "Why not?" with a peculiarly long interval between the "why" and the "not." Belgrove read, "Edict 1597577361544329621707193. To Dead Yawn, Headmaster, and to the gentlemen of the professorial staff, to all ushers, curators, and others in authority. This day of the nth month in the 8th year of the 77th Earl, to wit, Titus, Lord of Gormenghast, notice and warning is given in regard to their attitude, treatment, and methods of behaviour and approach in respect of the aforementioned Earl, who now, at the threshold of the age of reason, may impress Headmaster, gentlemen of the professorial staff, ushers, curators, and the like, with the implications of his lineage to the extent of diverting these persons from their duty in regard to the immemorial law which governs the attitude which Dead Yawn, etc., are strictly bound to show, insomuch that they treat the 77th Earl in every particular and on every occasion as they would treat any other minor in their hands, without let or favour, that a sense of the customs, traditions, and observances, and above all, a sense of the duties attached to every branch of the castle's life, be instilled, and an indelible sense of the responsibilities which will become his when he attains his majority, at which time, with his formative years spent among the riff-raff of the castle's youth, it is to be supposed that the 77th Earl will not only have developed an adroitness of mind, a knowledge of human nature, a certain stamina, but in addition a degree of learning dependent upon the exertions which you, sir, Headmaster, and you, sir, gentlemen of the professorial staff, bring to bear, which is your bounden duty, to say nothing of the privilege and honour which it represents. All this, sirs, is or should be common knowledge to you. But the 77th Earl, now being in his 8th year, I have seen fit to reawaken you to your responsibilities, in my capacity as Master of Ritual, etc., in which capacity I have the authority to make appearances at any moment in any classroom I choose, in order to acquaint myself with the way in which your various knowledge is inculcated, and with particular regard to its effect on the progress of the young Earl. Dead yawn, sir, I would have you impress your staff with the magnitude of their office, and, in particular—
But Belgrove, his jaws suddenly hammering away as upon a white-hot anvil, flung the parchment from him and sank to his knees with a howl of pain which awoke Dead Yawn to such a degree that he opened both his eyes.
What was that?"
said Dead Yawn to the fly.
"Belgrove is in pain,"
said the midget.
"Shall I finish the notice?" "Why not?"
said Dead Yawn. The paper was passed up to the fly by Flannel Cat, who had scrambled nervously out of the ashes and was already imagining Barquentine in his classroom, and the dirty liquid eyes of that one-legged creature fixed upon the ink that was even now trickling down the leather walls. The fly plucked the paper from Flannel Cat's hand and continued, after a preparatory whistle affected through a collusion of the knuckles, lips, and windpipe. So shrill was the sound of it that the recumbent staff were jolted upright on their haunches as one man. The fly read quickly, one word running into the next, and finished Barquentine's edict almost at a single breath.
"Would have you impress your staff with the magnitude of their office, and in particular those members who confuse the ritual of their calling with mere habit, making of themselves obnoxious limpets upon a living rock, or like vile bindweed round a breathing stem, stifle the castle's breath, signed as for Barquentine, Master of Ritual, Keeper of the Observances, and Hereditary Overlord of the Manuscripts by Stirpike, Amanuensis."
Someone had lit a lantern. It did very little, as it stood on the table, but to illumine with a dusky glow the breast of the stuffed cormorant. There was something disgraceful about its necessity at noon in summertime.
"If there ever was an obnoxious limpet swaddled in bindweed, you are that limpet, my friend,"
said Perch Prism to Belgrove.
"Do you realize that whole thing was addressed to you? You've gone too far for an old man, far too far. What will you do when they remove you, friend? Where will you go? Have you anyone that loves you?" "Oh, rotten hell!"
shouted Belgrove in so loud and uncontrolled a voice that even Dead Yawn smiled. It was perhaps the faintest, wanest smile that ever agitated for a moment the lower half of a human face. The eyes took no part in it. They were as vacant as saucers of milk, but one end of the mouth lifted, as might the cold lip of a trout.
"Mr. Fly,"
said the headmaster in a voice as far away as the ghost of his vanished smile.
"Mr. Fly, you— Virus, where are you?" "Sir,"
said the fly.
Was that Belgrove?
It was, sir, said the fly.
And how is he these days?
He is in pain, said the fly.
Deep pain?
Shall I inquire, sir? Said the fly.
Why not?
Belgrove, shouted the fly.
What is it, damn you?
Said Belgrove. The heat is inquiring about your health.
About mine?
Said Belgrove.
About yours?
Said the fly.
Sir?
Queried Belgrove, peering in the direction of the voice.
Come nearer,
said Dead Yawn.
I can't see you, my poor friend.
Nor I you, sir.
Put out your hand, Belgrove. Can you feel anything?
Is this your foot, sir?
It is indeed, my poor friend.
Quite so, sir, said Belgrove.
Now, tell me, Belgrove, tell me.
Yes, sir.
Are you unwell, my poor friend?
Localized pain, sir.
Would it be the mandibles?
That is so, sir.
As in the old days, when you were ambitious, when you had ideals, Belgrove? We all had hopes of you, I seem to remember.
There was a horrible sound of laughter like porridge.
Indeed, sir. Does anyone still believe in you, my poor friend?
There was no answer.
Come. It is not for you to resent your destiny, to cavil at the sere and yellow leaf. Oh, no, my poor Belgrove. You have ripened. Perhaps you have over-ripened. Who knows? We all go bad in time. Do you look about the same, my friend?
I don't know, said Belgrove.
I am tired,
said Dead Yawn.
What am I doing here? Where's that virus? Mr. Fly.
Sir, came the musket shot.
Get me out of this. Wheel me out of it. Into stillness, Mr. Fly. Wheel me into the soft darkness.
His voice lifted into a ghastly treble, which, though it was still empty and flat, had in it the seeds of life.
Wheel me,
it cried,
into the golden void.
Right away, sir, said the fly. All at once it seemed as though the professor's common room was full of ravenous seagulls, but the screaming came from the unoiled wheels of the high chair, which were slowly turning. The door handle was located by Flannel Cat after a few moments' fumbling, and the door was pushed wide. A glow of light could be seen in the passage outside. Against this light, the smoke wreaths coiled, and a little later the high, fantastic silhouette of Dead Yawn, like a sack at the apex of the rickety high chair, made its creaking departure from the room like some high, black form of scaffolding with a life of its own. The scream of the wheels grew fainter and fainter. It was some while before the silence was broken. None present had heard that high note in the headmaster's voice before. It had chilled them. Nor had they ever heard him at such length, or in so mystical a vein. It was horrible to think that there was more to him than the nullity which they had so long accepted. However, a voice did at last break the pensive silence. "A very dry dew, indeed," said Crust.
"Some kind of light, for grief's sake!"
shouted Perch Prism.
"What can the time be?"
whimpered Flannel Cat. Someone had started a fire in the grate, using for tinder a number of Flannel Cat's copybooks, which he had been unable to collect from the floor. The globe of the world was put on top, which, being of some light wood, gave within a few minutes an excellent light, great continents peeling off and oceans bubbling. The memorandum that Slypate was to be caned, which had been chalked across the coloured face, was purged away, and with it the boy's punishment, for Mulefire never remembered, and Slypate never reminded him. My, said Cutflower. If their head's subconscious ain't self-conscious, call me purblind, la. Call me purblind. What goings on, la?
What time is it, gentlemen? What can it be, if you please?
Said Flannel Cat, groping for his exercise books on the floor. The scene had unnerved him, and what books he had recovered from the floor kept falling out of his arms. Mr. Shrivel pulled one of them out of the fire, and, holding it by the flameless corner, waved it for a moment before the clock.
40 minutes to go, he said. Hardly worth it, or is it? Personally, I think I'll just...
So will I, la, cried Cutflower. If my class isn't either on fire by now or flooded out, call me witless, la. The same idea must have been at the back of most of their minds, for there was a general movement towards the door, only Opus Fluke remaining in his decrepit armchair, his loaf-like chin directed at the ceiling, his eyes closed, and his leathery mouth describing a line as fatuous as it was indolent. A few moments later, the husky, whispering sound of a score of flying gowns as they whisked along the walls of corridors presaged the turning of a score of door handles and the entry into their respective classrooms of the professors of Gormenghast.